So with all these brands coming online, it's got to be a little bit more difficult to establish your brand. I mean, you went out and talked to 25,000 people in 5 months. Do you think those 25,000 people remember No-Li? Are they coming back and buying your beers? I mean, how effective is that?
You do, and you complement with the website and the Facebook and Twitter and the social networks that I'm kind of removed from because I'm starting to get a little bit older. Not that old, but a little bit older. You get feedback right away. It's instant. We did a kickoff in Olympia, Washington. Before I got back to my parents' place, there was already a posting about how great it was. And that makes you feel like, man, you made an impact. But when you're talking, you're allowing somebody to hold that bottle, and you're telling them about what it really took to make that by somebody and what they did and what their name was and where the ingredients were sourced and why it tastes differently, like having the oysters and the. I mean, it just all of a sudden it just feels right.
And each one of those experiences is a connection, and it's a real, genuine, authentic connection with a customer, and that has a lasting impact. And that's what I believe builds craft beer brands, and that's what it's this conversation that craft beer drinkers want to have with the craft beer brewers. But it has to be authentic. It has to be John standing in the store, holding the bottle, explaining the story. If it's not authentic, if it's just a hired model in the store, right, people are going to see through that, and it's not authentic, and that's not going to work because it's not a real connection with the customer.
Great point, because when I was at Rainier and Henry's, we had the Rainier Henry's girls or whatever, and at that point the thinking in the 80s was, hey, we just have to get some attractive person out there with a bottle in front of them. Everybody else is so ignorant, stupid, they're just going to buy that beer. And maybe that's the time that we were in then, but that isn't enough now to carry a purchase price of what his great beers are worth. They want to know why that is special. And when you do a hand sell or you know, he's at a festival, Bill's at a festival, and he's talking to somebody, and you're looking eye to eye, that's irreplaceable. Fremont Brewing in Seattle, kind of by Lake Union. Matt Lincecum does Fremont Brewing Company, and he is a warrior at getting out there and meeting people. And his tap room is always packed because they want to meet Matt serving beer behind the bar when he's there. And he's like a little folk hero. Not little, you know, in stature, but I mean, just it's growing, right? And that's different from, say, when Paul Shipman built Red Hook, and it was the trolleyman in Fremont years and years ago, and the red door was the old red door before Alpha remodeled it and the whole block changed. That was special. And it's not that Red Hook isn't special today, because it is. It's special in a different way, because it's in Portsmouth and it's in Seattle or Woodinville. But when Paul was there and he was in the trolleyman, that was a different experience.
So that's actually an interesting point to consider as you grow and as you grow up and as your brand gets a little bit older, you know, assuming both Port City and No-Li stick around for a while. How do you guys envision your brand?
Was that subtle?
Assuming they stick around for a while. How do you envision your brands maybe shifting or changing to, I guess, better reflect who you are at that time? I mean, in 5, 10, 15 years, presumably the beer space will look different. Your brands will be selling some more barrels. I mean, you guys will be a different company at that point. So how do you continue to evolve and adapt?
It's as a brand evolves, you do have to adapt. And as it gets bigger, you have to find different ways to make those connections, but they have to be authentic connections with your customer. You mentioned Twitter, you mentioned the other social media. All those ways, those are all great ways to reach customers if you're doing it authentically. The problem that big companies have with something like Twitter is that they don't understand those real customer connections, those one-on-one customer connections. They're trying to use mass media techniques on something like Twitter, and it doesn't work. It falls flat, and people see through it, and it just doesn't work. I use Twitter as an example because for some reason craft beer loves Twitter, and Twitter loves craft beer. But that's a real connection there that you're making with customers every day. There's information exchange, there's information about events, but they are genuine, authentic connections that you're making with customers every day.
I keep hearing the word authenticity a lot, so I'm going to ask the question of like, how do you make your brand authentic? And I guess how is No-Li authentic? Why is it authentic? Why is Port City authentic? You say you have to create that authenticity, but what is authenticity for No-Li? What is authenticity for Port City?
Can I start?
Yeah, please.
Because on this, I think the industry is so enamored. The darling is barrels. How many barrels do you do? How many barrels are you up? What percent of growth are you at? My question is, who cares? It matters if that's what you want to do, and financially, if you put yourself in a position where you have to achieve so many barrels. I can't speak for Bill, but for Mark and I, barrels is not the indicator. It's not a measurement. It's not what we tout. What we get excited about is this, right? It's like Wrecking Ball is out, Imperial Stout. It might be limited release. We're not sure. It could be year-round. And the story about this beer and telling about it, if we sell enough at the right price, well, then we're going to be fine. If we can pay our bills and we can make payroll. But I think for us, our measurement isn't barrels. It's what we're creating. And not to sound like some idealistic what have you, because we've both been in the business long enough. It's more than just a number. We're not chasing a ghost. I think the emotional feedback we get is worth so much more in what we're building. And I don't anticipate No-Li being 100,000 barrels in 5 years. I don't know if you anticipate you being that size,
But that brings up another point. I mean, can you be authentic, and can you grow, and can you start moving beyond that 1 or 2% consumer that really cares about the story that's on the bottle, and have some sustainability with that sort of guy that's just going to go to the store and maybe routinely pick up the 6-pack or routinely pick up Wrecking Ball if that's his favorite beer?
I believe that you mentioned 1 or 2% of, I believe that the percent is much, much higher than that with craft beer. And when you hear John talk, I mean, here's a man that just embodies authenticity. I mean, you hear him talking about his beer, that is authenticity. You might not know how to define it, but you know it when you see it. And that's a guy who's living his brand and bringing the brand to life, and just it's pure authenticity.
That's a great point of what we're trying to live with people we work with, that we're blessed to work with in our companies, is it is a culture. And the culture, from my experiences in the industry, like you for a long time, start from the top down. And they're built and they're grown and they're rounded out by everybody around us, and they're shaped and moved. And if you like what that's becoming, then you just embrace it even more. And if it kind of gets a little bit to the left or to the right, that's where you try to bring it back in and go, what are we really doing this for? I don't think necessarily, Bill and I are here chasing a number, because if we wanted to chase a number, I could go sell a large domestic brewer's beer. And that doesn't mean the beer is bad or less or inferior or better. It just means it's more of a corporate structure. I think we do what we do because we have the ability to shut, and move and
It works. I mean, there's definitely a number that makes it all make sense, and keeps.
There's definitely a number where it has to work, and if you don't have that, if you don't hit that number, you're not going to be around for very long. Certainly, it has to make business sense. It has to work. But where is that number? It's different for No-Li. It's different for Port City. It's different for every brand that's out there. But getting back to how do you grow and still be authentic? We have 25 people that work for our company right now. And whether it's me out in the market talking about our beer, or one of our 25 dedicated on the team that are out talking about the beer, they have the same enthusiasm for our beers that I do. And they're out there talking about with the same emotion and the same authentic interest that I have in the brewery. And that's what carries it forward, is not just me being out making these connections, but a team of people that care as much about the beer as I do, and as much about the brand, and getting it out there and sharing that with people out in the market.
And on that too, I mean, at the end of the day, to your point is can you pay your bills? Are you going to be in the black or slightly in the red? Well, it starts with what kind of revenue you can generate by the quality of the beers and the packages that you give to the customer. And as we started earlier on, if you're driving a half pack and you're a small brewery and you're competing against a larger craft brewery that has a half pack, if there's some reason your half pack doesn't stand distinctively apart, well, then get ready to sell it for X dollars to compete with them, and you will go out of business. You're absolutely right. But the stuff we're trying to do is to find that niche that people respect in that beer quality and innovation, that they do pay more for it, because they know our cost structure, like a small coffee company versus a Starbucks, is dramatically higher than somebody selling 100,000 barrels, 200,000 barrels, or 1 million barrels.
Sure.
Yeah.
So ways that you can stay distinctly or differentiate yourself, stay distinctly apart from that half pack next to you on the shelf. What are some of the ways? I know we've talked about a few, but I'm not going to lead you down a road. Give me a few examples.
Well, price. When you get into a arena where you're competing on price, a small brewer is always going to lose because there's always going to be somebody that can come in, undercut your price, and win that battle. We don't do business with discount retail because that is where you're getting into a price arena and you're competing at that point on price and on margin, and everything gets squeezed. And that's not an arena that we want to be in. We work with retailers that are full markup retailers and that focus on quality and do hand selling rather than just trying to compete on price.
So you guard yourself from price by not playing with those other competitors.
Exactly. And we lose some sales along the way because there are times where we don't hit a price point that a restaurant or a retailer is trying to hit, and that's okay. We move on.
But what happens when those guys that are competing on price come into the places that you're trying to play at?
That's where the hand sell and the connection and the beer innovation, the quality stands apart. For us, sometimes in any craft brewer, and it's knowing what your cost structure is, and it's not a perfect science for us that they don't have some CPA or a finance whiz sitting behind a curtain. But if you know roughly what it takes you for your cost of goods to produce that case of whatever or that keg, and you know how many dollars you need to make on the gross to compete, well, then you know what you can price at. Bill and I, we know where we can play and how much we can kind of spend to still stay relevant, because you do want to keep the name out there. But we also have to be incredibly resourceful, which is why he's got 25 people as part of this great company evangelizing the beer. It's the best message you can do.
Yeah, the price, it has to make sense. It has to make sense for a full price retailer to carry. It has to make sense for a restaurant to carry. So when I'm not saying that price is irrelevant, I'm saying it because it's very relevant, but at the same time, the right price is what's important.
Now, sort of an interesting question. How much of price and that element determines who your distribution partner is going to be? Does that play a role in your decision making when you're looking at entering a new market and interviewing potential wholesale partners?
Yeah, that's one of the points that's negotiated when you're talking to a new distributor. And different distributors have different price structures, but generally they'll tell you what they need to make for it to make sense to them, and you find the right partner.
I'd say when you're doing the interviews and you sit down and cost, what does it cost to make the beer, and they have a price structure with all their other crafts. And part of the Northwest, it's very chain driven. We're lucky to have a great distributor in Odom Corporation, and we sit down and go, look, we just can't play in that place. And we want to expand with you, and we want to get this mutual partnership, but we just can't survive if we get into that pool. And we work together to create another pool. And it takes a lot of energy and time, but it's the only place a small brewer, sometimes, they call it, what's perceived value or what's equity. It's basically what a customer will pay for your product. And we earn it every day in a very hand-to-hand type of way to say, I'm going to pull out another one here. Jetstar, right? That's from the expo. We
John Bryant, the king of branding here at the Brew Talks.
No, but there's a reason we do that.
Where's the Port City bottle?
No. But Chris, seriously, there's a reason you pull those out, because you want somebody to attach to you, right? So it's your point that you recognize it goes, we put a lot of time and energy, say that what we put on the bottle, what we tell about the story is real, and that it works. And when we put Washington State on the map, and we put a balloon where Spokane is, if you live in Washington, D.C., I bet nobody in this room has probably ever been to Spokane. You have, all right, okay. So we tout that because it's like, visit Spokane in Washington, D.C. and visit Spokane in Spokane. We're going to wrap ourselves around that flag and say there's something really great happening there. But with our distributor, too, in pricing, it's like we think that investment in that beer and that packaging, the real story, is worth more because it takes us more to make that. And that is my last prop.
Well, you don't have any more. You don't have any more in your bag, my friend. They're all on the table. Okay, so pricing is obviously part of how you can differentiate yourself. That's going to vary from brewery to brewery. Everyone, like you said, is going to have to figure out their cost of good and their margins. What's another way? I mean, how about packages? You guys obviously differentiate. Just sitting right here, 6-packs and 22s. So what sort of considerations should other craft brewers think about when they're maybe they're starting their brand, or maybe they're trying to redefine their brand, or maybe they're trying to find themselves. How much does package size and quantity play a role in that? I mean, you're seeing a lot of new packages coming out, cans, big cans.
Different look is when you go to your structure of your company, if you're an established company and you're selling already at a price point that might be in a 12-pack, might be in a 6-pack, and you're trying to compete with a larger regional brewer, and that's what you do every day, I think the bigger question in that scenario is how do you begin to change that to create a point of difference, be it in how you brew, ingredients you source, brewing techniques, people culture to believe that you can do something differently. What we have the ability to do, because they're newer companies, is we get to establish that from a very fresh foundation and say, hey, we're going to be a 5,000 barrel brewery in like another year. At 5,000 barrels, how do we employ a certain amount of people at a living wage job that they can go home at night and feel, you know what, I'm part of this and I can pay my bills personally too? It's a lot of it is the people of what we do. And if you have a workforce, if you want to call it that, or partners or associates or teammates, but they're not seeing that as well, then it all already breaks down. And that's part of the value inside your company.
Speaking to package, when we sell in bottles and we sell in kegs, but we didn't come out with an idea of we need to sell X number of bottles and X number of draft in order to be successful. We let the market decide that. And a typical startup brewery should be selling, that is doing package and draft, should be doing, we thought it would be about 20% package in the first year and 80% draft. And our first year we were about 30-70, 30% package, 70% draft. But then the package product grew very quickly, not because we wanted it to, but because that's what the market wanted. When we opened, I mentioned that we were the only, before we opened, DC was the only major metro area in the country that didn't have a local brewery. Well, Whole Foods and Giant Foods, Safeway, the local chains wanted to have local beer, packaged beer on their shelves, and they didn't have a lot of options. And if they wanted the beer brewed inside the Beltway, we were the option. And so as a result, there's pent-up demand for local beer in the grocery stores around here. And so we ended up very quickly selling a lot more packaged beer than we intended to. But you know, we're going to go with it. And so it's more market-driven for us than a plan we had.
That's another interesting point, like how retailers are sort of responding to this consumer shift in demand for craft beer. What are you guys seeing out in the trade from the retailer perspective? I mean, you mentioned Safeway and Whole Foods, you know, really wanting a local option. What are retailers saying about the growth in the craft beer space, and what are they indicating that they want from you guys? I mean, they could presumably go to 20 or 30 other local options, you know, in some places. I know in Boston there's, you know, probably 20 or 30 people saying that we're local Boston. So what are they saying to you guys that they want from you?
It does, and it does vary market by market, obviously. What our retailers are saying to us is, please don't run out. Please keep us stocked. And so we work very hard to make sure that we can keep up with that.
What about putting you on the shelf to begin with? I mean, there's how many breweries? 18 breweries in Spokane now?
Right about there, and growing.
Go to your local retailer and say, no, like we're local, yeah, and keep pushing that. How are you going to stay on that? How are you going to keep that shelf space?
Economics forward, and for another small brewery to come out in a 6-pack in a chain-driven environment, and let's say they go $9.99, throw a price point out there every day. The pressure of how that structure works is, okay, now you got to come down. What it costs them to make that product for what they can make in selling it, you can't survive unless you have private equity money or something coming in from the outside, which goes back to the people. You've now changed your structure. Now you've changed it. Like, we bleed this thing, right?
And there again, you're competing on price. You're not competing on these other things we've been talking about, and that's where it gets very tough.
Absolutely. So what we're trying to do, and we're in a different environment here. You know, in the Northwest, it's very chain-driven. It's very price-driven. But what we're starting to see is there's so many breweries that the 22-ounce bottle section is beginning to go like this. And as more customers get educated, because Bill's staff is out there hand selling all the time, people want diversity. They don't want the same 6-pack, because this is what we're finding. Our draft sales are dramatically larger than we projected, and I think part of the reason is you can't get it in a 6-pack yet or a half-pack, and we're different than the East Coast. You either get a 22 or you get a draft handle, right? So you go and let's say you pay $6 for a No-Li 22. You go to a bar and a pint's $5. You can also go to that same grocery store and get a major domestic craft beer or a major regional craft beer, and it's on deal for $5.99 to $6.99. Okay, fine, I'll grab the tag, I take it, I go home. You go to your bar, and that same pint's $5, but you just paid $7 or $6 for a six-pack. You're gonna get the best, I truly believe, from the years we've done this. As a customer, you go to that bar and you're gonna get the best beer for $5, $6, or $7 that you can get. And I think the lower pricing in the grocery adversely affects your ability to compete in draft, straight up.
Will that keep you in business?
Absolutely. A large part of our business is draft. You know, we run the models to make sure that, you know, all the costs that go into selling a keg is profitable. Yeah.
And that draft is where people learn about your beer. It's in the bars, it's in the restaurants where the bartender's recommending it. It's something new. Like you say, the craft beer drinkers are always looking for something new. If they haven't seen it before, they see No-Li on tap, they say, ask about it. Well, I haven't seen that tap handle before. And that's where trial is conducted in the bar. And then people are much more likely to buy your beer off the shelf after they've had it in a bar than to just go buy a six-pack of something they haven't tried before and then be stuck with 5 bottles they might not like.
And Chris, if you're in Washington, D.C., and you're one of these 7,000 people coming to this conference, if you don't try a Port City beer, you haven't had the experience. Because it's a local beer, seriously. I mean, I'm going to go seek one out to go, hey, I want to be part of the local scene. And it's just like a local cuisine, local music. Beer, because it's so local, is catching that type of thread.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that through this whole discussion, I think maybe we've really missed is differentiating yourself even on premise and on draft. What are some ways that brewers, when there's 25 tap handles standing next to each other, and the guy walks into the bar and says, "I'll have a beer," how's he going to pull No-Li? How's he going to pull Port City?
That's one of the things in a city like Washington, D.C., where it's very transient. There's people from all over the place. There's people traveling here, coming into D.C. every single day. Usually the first question that people ask is, what do you got that's local? Right. And you see more and more restaurants and bars that are responding to that. I mean, they need to respond to that because they need to satisfy their customers. And that's what their customers are asking for is, what do you got that's local? What do you got that's new?
And what's the beer scene like in Spokane on premise?
Oh, come on, you're laughing. We have to acknowledge straight up, we're not going to compete with the larger craft brewers. There's too much money thrown at that segment of the business to build branding. And so we keep going back to hand sales or education or the experience. We're putting our money into people out there talking to people about the beer. We're not saying, here's a beer, have a free pint, or here's a beer, have a free bottle. We're saying, hey, experience this. You know, try it, take it home. You don't have to buy it again if you don't want to, but here's the story behind this beer. Be it in Spokane or in Denver, Colorado, or in Washington, D.C., or in Sweden. And we think the quality, much like Bill, is going to stand up. And I think there is something special about being small. I think there's something special about being a small coffee shop. I love Starbucks. I grew up in that area. But I really like going to a down-the-street coffee shop that's quirky, and it's got its own feel, and it's got the local underground newspaper, and you feel part of something special.
So do you guys think that'll just keep going? I mean, is that enough to keep the craft beer business on the trajectory that it's on right now, this 17% growth in volumes and dollars, pretty much?
Well, I think it comes down to what is your permanent advantage as a craft brewery? What is your permanent advantage? And for us, what is our permanent advantage? And people ask me all the time, there's so much competition in the beer business, don't you worry about even other craft breweries taking away your business? And I don't worry about that because our permanent advantage is that we are located in Alexandria, Virginia, right outside of Washington, D.C., a thriving market, and no one else can replicate that. And that
why didn't you give the Hoya some crap? Sorry to cut you off. Let's go.
I mentioned Florida Gulf Coast. Come on now.
Sorry, Bill.
Okay, so that's your permanent advantage, obviously, is just being that local brand where no one else was. But there's a lot of craft breweries that are starting up that aren't going to be the first to be the brewery brewed within the Beltway. They're not going to have that advantage. So I guess it's sort of a hypothetical question in a sense, like, can craft beer continue growing the way it is, and will craft brewers continue to differentiate themselves and be enough different from one another that they have a large enough consumer base to sustain them and sustain the growth, or does it just at some point slow down and some fade away? I mean, where do you guys see it going?
So, Chris, what was the name of those executives from that company put $100 million into
Brew Hub, yeah.
Okay, Brew Hub?
Yes.
Okay, so some people way smarter, not than Bill, but than me, economists, finance people, investing money, made a very disciplined decision to say there's still money, that's just my personal belief, there's still an upside to craft beer, or they wouldn't invest into that business model, would be my guess. That is validating sitting here today going, there's some people in very different places making bets on craft beer, and they're positive bets. And that shapes emotion too, and it shapes the direction of an industry. Those messages go to retail buyers, they go to everywhere. These people are saying, you know, get in now, and we're gonna be part of that.
Are those guys betting on the niches that we were talking, niches in neighborhoods that we were talking about earlier?
I believe that small breweries are also so much, they contain so much of they have personalities, and they're made up of the personalities of the people that work in them. And if I decided tomorrow to move to Spokane and open a brewery right next to No-Li, and with the intention of duplicating it, I would not be able to do that. It's so much of their personality, it's so much of their hard work and their belief as individuals of what they believe a successful craft beer brand can be, that you cannot duplicate it, and it necessarily ends up being something different. Is it going to be successful or not? Well, that's not up to us or them, it's up to the individual. So it really, you don't know, but you do know that that their brand cannot be replicated. What they're doing is authentic, it's real, it connects with people, and if other brands can do those things also, then there's no reason why they can't be successful as well.
That brings me to my final question, and then we're going to take some audience question and live stream questions if there are any. Are there any niches left?
Absolutely. It'd be like being a musician. Well, it'd be like being the patent office, where there's some quote a couple hundred years ago, they were going to close the patent office down because everything had been created. It's like music. I mean, there's just a new genre or something new created every decade or every 5 years. You know, as society changes and moves and economics change and move, personalities move, there's always new opportunity. And you know, if you look at Anheuser-Busch being internationally owned now, and supposedly the major domestic brewers are shedding a few million barrels a year. If they were to continue to shed a few million barrels a year, well, there's your growth for craft beer.
There's also the other thing that changes over time is consumer beer drinkers' tastes. Those change over time as well, and they'll be as beer drinkers develop a taste for something new, then innovation necessarily follows that. So as you know, the hoppy beer trend, that wasn't always a thing. It's becoming a thing, and it continues to grow. But you know, that may be a pendulum that'll swing back again, and people may move on to some other different style of beer as well. So innovation is constant. It's part of craft beer. It's part of the beer drinkers. That's what they want, is new styles of beer, and their preferences change over time as well.
Chris, we met with a regional grocery buyer, and it wasn't a national chain. And he had grown up in the Spokane area. He went to college or did some schooling in Seattle. And he was so excited, and he named off like 5 craft breweries that were within like a couple hundred miles. And he was so vested, he had to do his job because he has numbers to make and things to do. But he was so excited about helping to build that. And he referenced 3 to 4 or 5 times the coffee industry and what it had done and what he believes it could be. Now the coffee industry has consolidated a little bit too, and it's rolled up to a certain degree with some money. Will that happen to craft beer? It's hard to tell. I think it's what our expectations are as owners or companies or cultures. If you're happy and you can make a living, let's just take a barrel number of 10,000 barrel and X dollars per barrel, and you can have a great life, you can spend time with your family, and you can do whatever you want to do secondarily, and you create a great management team. Well, what the hell is wrong with that? That's what I would say. I think that's a beautiful thing. Now, if you're chasing a number and you want to get to a certain place that accomplishes something, and everybody buys into that, and it's worth it, God bless you too.
Well, I don't know how many audience questions we might have, but someone earlier had asked a question regarding sort of the winification point that we hit on. And their point was that wine is one of those products that can sit on the shelf a while, whereas beer is not, and thus maybe sort of contributing to the amount of brands that are allowable in the marketplace. What do you guys think?
That's true. Wine ages and beer goes stale, and that's where it's, obviously you do everything you can do to keep your beer fresh. Selling regionally for us helps us to manage our inventory, keep the inventory short, and keep it fresh. But one of the things about the wine business that we always try to do at Robert Mondavi was to bring it down off its high horse and make it more approachable to people. And to kind of put it in real terms that, wine isn't this big complicated thing that you can't understand. It's supposed to be enjoyed. And if you're not enjoying it, then what's the point? Wine in essence was trying to be more like beer, where everybody can understand it, everybody can enjoy it. It doesn't have to be this difficult thing. Now what I would hate to see, and I don't want to see happen, is the beer business go off into this tier where wine is trying to come down from. And you see, as more styles come out, people get more and more, there's more stratification of styles, but what I would hate to see is to see this kind of what you would call snobbery in the wine business. I mean, beer is it's a drink for everyone, and it should remain that way.
Do you think some of that is maybe happening a little bit?
So we have, 7,000 people arriving into DC for this, Craft Brewers Conference. And everybody's got these huge emotions and great expectations. There's a lot of sharing happening and a lot of optimism. And that same thing was shared like about 96 when things kind of went sideways from a lot of outside political forces, maybe the Anheuser-Busch battle with Samuel Adams. I think those are the bigger things that could derail craft that we don't even know about. Personally, I believe, like Bill believes, there's plenty of room for locality. I think with Anheuser-Busch being internationally owned, and their larger brands are struggling a little bit, and they're shedding millions of barrels, and maybe some would argue they're not spending the money on brand building and building the image of what separates one light beer from another light beer. That opens up the door for us to go tell the story, and people are embracing it because it's real. It's real.
And you see this across the country, that brands are moving more towards regional, away from national brands, and more towards regional and local brands.
If there's any audience questions, we'll take them now. I can sort of pass the mic over here.
So the theme that I'm hearing, and this is coming from someone who's starting a brewery, so kind of stepping back a couple years for you guys as well. But it sounds to me like the retailers want to hear that they need constant demand, or they need to fill constant orders to keep their shelves stocked, right? Which in our case, at 240 barrels in our first year, we don't necessarily have that type of capacity. So would you recommend to people who are starting out in the industry to build that story bar by bar, bartender by bartender, doing the hand selling, and then expand to the grocers as that opportunity presents itself?
I would say yes, absolutely. On premise, the bars and restaurants, that's where trial takes place. That's where people learn about new beers. That's where bartenders are recommending new things to people. And it's only a pint. You're not talking about, it's not a major purchase. It's not a 6-pack of beer. You're not buying, it's not a large purchase. You're not going to be stuck with it. If you don't like it, it's one beer and you move on. But that's where you can build your brand, and that's where people are going to try it. And then if you show them that if they learn that they like your beer, then they're going to seek it out in retail.
Yeah, I agree. The best thing probably we could recommend is each pint of beer over that bar comes with an explanation or a story or that connection, and that will just spread through your community. Yeah.
How can craft brewers make sure that the bartender's telling that story properly? How have you guys been able to coach them a little bit and say, this is the No-Li story, this is the Port City story, tell your consumers what it's about?
One of the things that we do when we get a new tap handle, it's pretty much standard operating procedure, is that When we first started, I personally would come in and do a sales training, a staff training, a little 10-minute talk about our company and about our beer, and explain to them what the beer is all about. And we still do that. We have 2 sales reps that are out in the market, and when we get a new tap handle, they're in there on that Friday afternoon lineup, talking to the staff about what the beer is like, how it's made, what makes it special, and that kind of thing. And it builds that word of mouth that helps the restaurant and bar staffs understand what the beer's all about and can share that with the beer drinker.
And if you're at home and you can't quite hear, we have the bass right below us in a live bar that's probably full of 100 people partying as we have the bass rocking. We're answering questions. So.
Well, on that note, I guess we'll wrap things up. Your beer's looking a little empty. I know the folks here at Smith Commons in D.C. would probably appreciate everyone buying another pint, and we're just prolonging that a little bit. But thank you all for coming out. I know some people filtered in and out throughout the time here. Once again, we'll be in Boston May 2nd doing our full-day conference. We got a great lineup of speakers already announced. Andy Thomas, the president of Craft Brew Alliance. That's Kona, Red Hook, Widmer. We also got Tom Fox and Liz Cruz. Tom Fox is a retail category expert who you know real well, and Liz Cruz from Nielsen. We got the folks from Harpoon, Rich and Dan, and a few more speaker announcements on the way. And I know I'm forgetting a few, but check out the website, brewbound.com. We'll have everything there for you. And hopefully one lucky person that's still hanging around will get a free attendee. Yes. Thank you again, guys, for joining us. I really appreciate it, and thank you to Smith Commons for hosting us. And we'll be in Chicago for our next Brew Talks. Tune in on the live stream if you can't be there.
Okay.
Cheers.
Thanks.